They packed their bags laughing, and I was standing right there, close enough to hear every zip, every click of every lock, excluded from a trip I had made possible with my own hands. My father looked me in the eye that morning and said I would ruin it, and then he walked out the door with his wife and her daughter and 4 matching suitcases and left me standing on the threshold of my own life like I was a stranger in it. They posted the photos before the plane even landed. The terrace, the view, the smiles, and I watched every single one from the house they had left me in, alone, like I didn't exist, like the past 18 months of work I had quietly done for them had never happened at all. What they didn't know, what none of them had stopped long enough to ask, was that the resort they were laughing inside of only existed for them because of me. The owner. The contract. The relationship. Mine. And 3 days into the trip, while they were still smiling for photos, his phone rang at the resort, calm voice, short call, no room for argument. Because the person they had left standing at the door wasn't just a name on a family list they could cross out. I was the reason the door existed. They just never looked back long enough to see it, and that was the first mistake, but it wasn't the last. The suitcases were already by the door when I came downstairs that morning. 4 of them. Matching luggage sets my father had bought specifically for this trip, the kind you order weeks in advance, the kind that signals planning, intention, deliberate exclusion. My stepmother, Renata, was zipping the last one shut when she looked up at me with that particular smile she reserves for moments she's already won. "You're not packed," she said. Not a question. My father walked in from the kitchen, coffee in hand, car keys already clipped to his belt loop. He looked at me the way you look at something you've decided not to deal with, briefly, dismissively, the decision already made somewhere private where you're never invited. "Sit down, Cora." I sat. He explained it the way executives explain restructuring. Calmly. Efficiently. Italy was a family trip, the word family doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. And given the recent tension, given how things had been, he thought it would be better if I stayed home. A beat of silence. Renata's daughter, Priya, appeared in the doorway behind him, overnight bag on her shoulder, earbuds already in, already somewhere else. She was 17. I was 22 and stood in my own father's house listening to a sentence that ended with "you just ruin it." I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that would matter, and I'd learned a long time ago that protesting a decision my father had already made was just handing him material for why he'd been right. The driver arrived at 9. I watched from the hallway as they loaded the car. Renata hugged Priya and laughed at something she said. My father checked his phone twice, never once looked back at the house. The door clicked shut behind them with the finality of a period at the end of a sentence you didn't write. What none of them knew, what they hadn't thought to ask, was how that trip existed at all. 18 months ago, my father had asked me to handle the corporate account. His company had expanded into European operations, and he needed someone to manage the vendor relationships, the premium hotel contracts, the partnership agreements that kept his executive travel seamless. He'd handed it to me because I was detail-oriented, because I was trustworthy, because I was there. He'd handed it to me the same way he handed me everything, without acknowledgement, without title, without ever saying the word daughter in a sentence that also contained the word proud. The Amalfi property was mine. Specifically, the relationship with Domenico Ferro, the owner of Villa Serena, a boutique resort perched above the coast that had a 3-year waitlist and took private bookings exclusively through referrals. I had spent 4 months building that referral. 4 months of calls, of professional correspondence, of navigating a man who didn't extend courtesy to strangers and had no reason to extend it to me except that I gave him one. He knew my name. He knew my voice. He knew the company I represented and the integrity I'd brought to every exchange. My father knew none of this. He'd simply received a confirmation email, printed it, and told Renata they were going to Italy. The photos started appearing the second day. Renata's Instagram, public, because why wouldn't it be? The terrace with the view. The lunch spread. Priya holding a glass of sparkling water. laughing, the sea behind her looking like something out of a travel campaign. My father in sunglasses, relaxed in a way I'd never seen him in real life. 47 likes in the first hour. The caption said something about family, something about gratitude. I read it once. Put my phone face down on the kitchen counter. Then I opened my laptop. I wasn't looking for revenge. That's important to understand. What I was looking for was a contract clause I remembered from my initial agreement with Villa Serena, a detail about account management, about the designated liaison, about what happened when a booking was made under a corporate account whose primary contact had not authorized personal use. I found it in 11 minutes. I sat with it for 2 days. Not out of hesitation. Out of precision. There's a difference between reacting and deciding, and I had spent enough years in that house watching my father react to things to understand that decisions require patience. I made one phone call. Professional, measured. I identified myself by name and account number. I explained the situation without embellishment. Domenico Ferro listened to everything I said. Then, on the 3rd day of the trip, his resort's direct line called my father's phone. I wasn't there for it. I didn't need to be. But I know how Domenico operates, calm, private, exact. He wouldn't have raised his voice. He wouldn't have needed to. He simply would have named what had happened, explained the terms clearly, and asked a direct question that had no comfortable answer. My father's response came to me not through a call or a message but through something smaller, a single notification on the corporate account dashboard I still managed. A flag. A change in booking status. One line of text that told me the conversation had happened and that its outcome was exactly what the contract said it would be. 3 days in. Sun, photos, laughter. And somewhere on that terrace above the Amalfi Coast, my father was having a very different conversation than the one he'd planned. My phone lit up. A message from a number I didn't have saved, but recognized immediately. Renata's personal line. The preview showed the first few words, "I don't know what you." The message didn't finish loading. Renata's message sat unfinished on my screen for 6 hours before the next one came through. Not from her. From my father. It was 4 words. Call me. Right now. No punctuation on the last sentence. That told me everything about the state he was in. My father was a man who had never sent a text without a period in his life. Control was his native language, and those 4 words were the first signs of fluency slipping. I didn't call him. I responded with one line, "I'm available tomorrow at 10. The reply came back in under a minute. "This is not a scheduling situation, Cora." I set my phone down and made dinner. What I understood, that he didn't yet, was that the ground had already shifted. Domenico's call wouldn't have been an accusation, that wasn't how the man operated. It would have been a clarification. A professional, quiet clarification about the terms of the account, about the nature of the booking, and about the fact that the liaison who held that account had flagged an unauthorized use. No raised voice. No threat. Just the particular kind of calm that carries more weight than any argument because it requires no emotion to be devastating. My father would have understood immediately what that call meant. Not because he was perceptive, but because he'd built his entire career on reading the room when the room finally turned on him. The call came at 7:30 the next morning, 2 hours before I'd said I was available. I let it ring. He called again at 7:42. At 8:15, Priya sent me a message from the resort, and this surprised me, because Priya and I didn't have the kind of relationship that involved direct contact. "Can you please just talk to him?" No question mark. She'd inherited his punctuation when stressed. I stared at the message for a moment, because there was something in it I hadn't accounted for. Not guilt exactly. More like the discomfort of realizing that the edges of a situation you've drawn carefully don't always stay where you put them. At 10 o'clock exactly, I called my father back. He answered before the first ring finished. Renata was in the background. I could hear her, not the words, just the register, that particular frequency she uses when she's trying to control something by pretending she isn't. My father's voice was measured in the way that tells you someone has rehearsed an opening. He got 3 sentences in before the rehearsal ran out. I don't know what you told him, but whatever you said, a pause. Then, this is business. Cora, this involves the company. I know. It's a corporate account. Silence. The booking was made under company credentials, I continued, for a personal trip that I wasn't informed about and did not authorize. The contract is explicit. He started to say something, I heard the intake of breath, the beginning of a word, and then Renata's voice cut through, closer now, and whatever he'd been about to say dissolved. A door closed on their end. When he came back, the rehearsed calm was gone. How long have you been planning this? The question itself told me how little he understood what had actually happened. He thought this was a scheme. Something I'd constructed in advance, something strategic and cold. He couldn't locate the version of events where I had simply followed a contract clause I'd written 18 months ago, because that version required him to acknowledge what I'd actually built for him, and that acknowledgement had never been available to him. I didn't plan anything, I said. You used a corporate account for a personal booking without telling me. I flagged it. That's my job. Your job. He repeated it the way people repeat something when they want to imply it's absurd. I gave you that job. You gave me the work. I built the relationships. Another pause, longer this time. Then, quieter, Domenico is asking us to vacate the premium suite. I'd known that was coming. The contract clause wasn't nuclear, it wasn't an eviction. But it did trigger a reclassification of the booking from corporate endorsed to personal, which changed the rate structure and, at Villa Serena specifically, the room tier. The suite they were in was held exclusively for corporate accounts in good standing. A personal booking at the same property was an available room on the main floor with a partial view and no terrace. Renata's voice again in the background, clearer this time, close enough that she'd moved back to wherever he was standing. Ask her if she's spoken to anyone else. Ask her if she's, the sentence stopped. A deliberate stop, not a trailing off. There was something in that pause that snagged on something in me. Not what she'd said. What she hadn't finished saying. If she's spoken to anyone else. Anyone else meaning not Domenico. Anyone else meaning a second contact I hadn't made, or one that someone else was afraid I already had. Who else would I have spoken to? I asked. My father didn't answer the question. He moved past it in the way that people move past things they can't afford to examine. This can be fixed. I'll call Domenico directly, explain that there was a miscommunication on the account. He won't take that call. Not without me on it. Then get on it with me. I let the line sit quiet for a moment. Why wasn't I told about the trip? He exhaled. Cora. Not as a complaint. As a question. You used my account, my professional relationship, my 18 months of work. And you didn't tell me you were going. Why? The silence on the other end was a different kind now. Not the silence of someone choosing words. The silence of someone who doesn't have an answer that doesn't implicate them. Renata said something I couldn't fully catch, 2 words, maybe 3, and my father's voice came back with a new edge. We'll talk about this when we're home. The suite situation needs to be resolved before then. I'm aware. Domenico will want to hear from me by end of business today. If you want me on that call, I need to know by noon. He said he'd call back. He didn't call back by noon. What arrived instead was an email, not from him, from the company's legal coordinator, a man named Harish who handled internal disputes and contract reviews and who had never once reached out to me directly in the 2 years I'd worked the account. The subject line was clean and corporate, account authorization review. Villa Serena Partnership. I opened it. Read it twice. Harish wasn't asking about the booking. He was asking about the scope of my role on the account. Specifically, whether I held formal authorization as the designated liaison, or whether I had operated in a de facto capacity without official documentation. I had the documentation. Every email, every signed agreement, every countersigned term sheet, stored in a folder I'd been maintaining since the first call with Domenico's office. What I didn't have, what I was only now understanding I'd never been given, was a formal title. An official position. Anything on company letterhead that tied my name to the account in a way that would survive a legal review. My father hadn't given me that because giving me that would have required acknowledging it. I pulled up the folder. Scrolled to the original correspondence. Found the email chain from 18 months ago where I'd set up the account, where I'd introduced myself to Domenico's team, where the entire foundation of this relationship had been laid. The emails were thorough, professional, and signed with my name and a company email address my father had set up for me under the category of external project coordination. Not staff. Not employed. Coordination. I sat with that for a long time. Then I opened a second folder. One I hadn't touched in 6 months, and started reading through something I'd nearly forgotten about. A separate correspondence. Not with Domenico. With someone else at the property entirely. A woman named Julia, the resort's events director, who'd reached out 8 months ago about an unrelated partnership opportunity and who had, in the course of 3 exchanges, mentioned something about the account that I hadn't fully followed up on at the time. I found the 3rd email in the thread. Read the line halfway down. The room didn't change. My face didn't change. But something in the sequence of the last 48 hours clicked into an alignment I hadn't been looking for, and what it revealed wasn't just about a suite or a contract clause or an unauthorized booking. There was a second agreement attached to the Villa Serena account. One I hadn't created. And it had been signed 4 months ago. The second agreement was a consulting contract. 3 pages, attached as a PDF to the Villa Serena account folder, signed under a name I recognized immediately, Renata's maiden name, which she used professionally and which I had never once seen connected to anything involving my father's company until this moment. The document outlined a referral arrangement. For every corporate booking routed through the Villa Serena partnership, a 10% coordination fee would be paid to an external consultant. The consultant was Renata. The account that generated those bookings was mine. I read it 3 times. Not because it was complicated. Because I wanted to be exact about what I was looking at before I did anything with it. Julia's original email from 8 months ago suddenly made complete sense. She hadn't reached out about a new partnership opportunity. She'd reached out because something in the account structure had flagged as irregular on their end. 2 points of contact, 2 sets of correspondence, 2 people representing the same company in ways that didn't fully align. She'd been trying, diplomatically, to clarify who she was actually dealing with. I'd read it as a routine networking message and responded briefly before moving on to other things. I forwarded Julia's full email thread to my own personal address. Then I downloaded the consulting contract. Then I opened Harish's email again and read the question he'd asked about my authorization status with the clarity of someone who now understood exactly why the question had been sent. My father hadn't instructed Harish to review my authorization to protect the company. He'd done it to establish, on record, that I held no official title. So that if this situation escalated, my involvement with the account could be characterized as informal, deniable, the kind of thing that happens when you let a family member help out without formalizing anything. The consulting contract with Renata, meanwhile, was fully documented. Signed. Filed. I picked up my phone and called Harish directly. He answered on the second ring and started with the cautious register of someone who'd been briefed to be careful. I didn't give him the opening he was waiting for. I told him I had documentation of a secondary agreement attached to the Villa Serena account that he would want to review before the authorization inquiry went any further. A brief silence. He asked me to send it over. I said I would send it to him and to the company's external auditor simultaneously, since the agreement involved a financial arrangement with a director-level family member and would likely require independent review. Another silence, longer this time. He said he understood. I sent both emails before I put my phone down. My father called 40 minutes later. He didn't open with strategy this time. He opened with my name, just my name, in a tone I'd never heard from him, not anger, not authority. Something underneath both of those things. Cora. What did you send to Harish? The consulting contract between the company and Renata. Nothing on the line for a full 5 seconds. Where did you get that? It was attached to the account I manage. Has been for 4 months. He started to say something and stopped. I heard him move, a chair, a door, the ambient sound of the resort shifting as he found somewhere more private. When he came back, Renata wasn't in the background anymore. That contract was a separate arrangement. It had nothing to do with your account. It was filed inside my account folder by someone who had access to it. I didn't put it there. Another pause. Then, carefully, this doesn't need to go to the auditor. It's already there. He tried once more, a different angle, the tone shifting towards something that might have been, in another version of our history, persuasion. He talked about the company, about what an audit could mean for ongoing partnerships, about handling things internally. Every sentence was structurally sound and completely beside the point, because the point wasn't the company's reputation. The point was a contract that had been generating fees from work I did, paid to a woman who had told my father I'd ruin a family trip, and neither of them had said a single word to me about it. I'll be available when the auditor reaches out, I said, and ended the call. The auditor's office contacted me the following morning. A woman named Patricia, methodical and unhurried, who asked for the complete documentation trail on the Villa Serena account from its inception. I sent her everything. Every email, every signed term, every exchange with Domenico's office going back 18 months. The paper trail was clean because I had always kept it clean, not in anticipation of this moment but because that's how I worked. Patricia thanked me and told me the review would take 7 to 10 business days. It took 4. I found out through Harish, who called me on a Thursday afternoon with the particular efficiency of someone delivering news they're relieved to be delivering in only one direction. The consulting arrangement had been flagged as an undisclosed conflict of interest under the company's existing vendor policy. The fees that had been paid out, 6 payments over 4 months, would need to be returned. Renata's agreement with the company was terminated. The authorization question about my role on the account, Harish added, had been resolved in my favor given the volume of documentation demonstrating active and primary management. He didn't editorialize. Neither did I. My father didn't call after that. What arrived instead was a message, 2 days after the audit closed, sent from his personal email rather than his company address. It was 4 paragraphs long. I read the first 2, which covered ground I'd already covered myself, and skimmed the third, which began to move in the direction of explanation. The 4th paragraph started with the word however. I closed the email without finishing it. Renata called once. I let it go to voicemail. The message was 53 seconds long and I deleted it without listening. Priya texted me a week after they returned from Italy. Not about any of it, or at least, not directly. She asked if I wanted to get lunch sometime. Just that. No context, no preamble. I looked at the message for a long moment, because Priya was 17 and hadn't designed any of this and had simply grown up in a house where the architecture was already built before she arrived. I responded that I was available the following week. The auditor's final report, which I received a copy of, noted in its closing section that the primary account liaison for the Villa Serena partnership remained Cora, my name, my role, formalized now in language that couldn't be restructured around me. Domenico's office sent a separate note, professional and brief, confirming that the account was in good standing and that they looked forward to continued collaboration. I filed both documents in the same folder where I'd kept everything else. The corporate account still generates bookings. My father's company still uses the Villa Serena partnership. The difference is that every invoice, every confirmation, every signed term now carries a title beneath my name that wasn't there before. The suite with the terrace and the view of the coast sits at the top of the property's rate sheet. Exclusive to corporate accounts in good standing. Managed by their designated liaison. That's me. It always was.